She got into the wrong car, and that one mistake unraveled everything she thought she knew about love, pride, and the kind of man worth fighting for. Sofia Reyes wasn't looking for anyone. She was just trying to survive Manhattan on an empty bank account and a full heart. But fate, it turns out, doesn't ask for permission. And sometimes the wrong turn leads you exactly where you were always meant to go. Guys, before I continue, I need to ask for your help. This channel doesn't generate any revenue for me anymore. I don't make any money from these videos, but I have an incredible team that works every week to bring you quality content, and I want to keep that going. That's why I created Allure TV, an app with narrated stories, uncensored, unedited, and ad-free. Things that this platform would never allow here. There's new content every day of the week, and you can listen to it in multiple languages or read it if you prefer. The link is pinned in the comments, or just point your camera at the QR code that's on the screen right now. Help us keep the channel active. I'm truly grateful. Help us keep the channel active. The morning had already decided it was going to be difficult. Sofia Reyes pushed through the revolving door of her apartment building at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes late for a client meeting that she absolutely could not afford to lose. Her portfolio bag slapped against her hip, her iced coffee was already sweating through the paper sleeve, and the heel of her left boot had developed a sound, a faint, rhythmic click that felt personal, like Manhattan itself was mocking her pace. She pulled up her phone. The Uber app blinked, driver arriving, black sedan, license plate NYK 4892. She scanned the curb. 3 black sedans idled in the morning haze, exhaust curling into the October air like lazy ghosts. The second one matched. She was already moving before she finished the thought. The door opened smoothly, heavier than she expected, the kind of door engineered for silence, and she dropped into the back seat with the specific grace of someone who had given up on grace entirely. 54th and Lex, please, she said, already unzipping her portfolio. And if you can avoid the FDR, I would genuinely love you forever. Silence, not the polite professional silence of a driver navigating an app, a different kind, weighted, present. She looked up. The man behind the wheel wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't wearing a rideshare badge or a lanyard, or the slightly exhausted expression of someone 6 rides into a Tuesday morning shift. He was turned just slightly in his seat, one arm resting along the back of the passenger headrest, watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. Not amusement, exactly. Something quieter, something more curious. He was, and she registered this against her will, extraordinarily well put together. Dark blazer over a white shirt open at the collar, a watch on his left wrist that didn't need to announce itself, strong jaw, eyes that were an unsettling shade of amber, warm and sharp at the same time, the kind of eyes that made you feel briefly that you'd been read. 54th and Lex, he repeated. His voice was low and even, with just enough texture to catch. Sure. The car pulled smoothly into traffic. Sofia blinked, turned back to her portfolio, told herself she had bigger concerns. She lasted approximately 40 seconds. The app says 12 minutes, she said, not looking up. I need 8. I'll see what I can do. That's not a yes. It's not a no either. She looked up again. He was focused on the road now, fingers easy on the wheel. But there was a faint tension at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but leaning toward one. Something about it irritated her in a way she couldn't justify. Do you always answer questions like that? Do you always get into strangers' cars without checking the plate? The question landed quietly, without edge, but it landed. Sofia felt the slight shift, the half-second where her brain caught up with what her body had already done. She glanced at the door, then at the back of his headrest. No rideshare sticker, no app icon on the dash. This isn't my Uber, she said. No, he agreed pleasantly. You're not my driver. Also correct. A long beat passed. Outside, the city moved at its indifferent pace. Yellow cabs cutting lanes, a cyclist weaving between buses, a woman walking 3 dogs with the calm authority of someone who had negotiated harder things. Why didn't you say something? Sofia asked. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Just briefly. Just long enough. You seemed like you were having a morning, he said. And you asked nicely. She didn't know what to do with that. She should have been embarrassed. She was somewhere underneath the more immediate sensation of not knowing what she was feeling. She shifted in her seat, and the leather exhaled softly beneath her, and the car smelled like cedar and something cooler, like clean air pulled through expensive things. "I need to be at 54th and Lex," she said, mostly to herself. "I know," he said. "I heard you the first time." Another silence. This one felt different from the first, less unfamiliar, like it had already started to settle between them. "I'm Sofia," she said finally. She wasn't sure why. He didn't answer immediately. Let a full intersection pass. Then, "Ryan." Just the first name. No explanation. No context. Like a sentence with the rest of it still pending. The car moved through Midtown with a fluid precision that had nothing to do with urgency and everything to do with knowing exactly where it was going. Sofia found herself looking at the city through the tinted glass and feeling oddly less late than she had a few minutes ago, even though nothing had changed. Everything had changed. She just didn't know it yet. The meeting had gone well enough. Sofia had presented her portfolio with the kind of controlled confidence she'd spent years building, the sort that looked effortless from the outside and cost everything on the inside. The client had nodded in the right places, asked intelligent questions and shaken her hand at the end, with the firm, decisive grip of someone who had already made up their mind. She had walked out of the 54th Street office building with a tentative contract and the particular lightness that only comes when something you desperately needed decides to go your way. She allowed herself exactly one moment of quiet celebration, eyes closed, face tilted toward the pale October sun, before the city reminded her it had no interest in her feelings. The crosswalk light changed. Someone bumped her shoulder. A taxi honked at nothing specific, the way taxis in New York honk, as a philosophical statement rather than a practical one. Sofia adjusted her portfolio bag, pulled her jacket tighter against the wind cutting down Lexington Avenue, and stopped at the newsstand on the corner to grab a bottle of water. She was reaching for her wallet when the magazine rack caught her eye. Fernandez Capital closes 400 million fund. Ryan Fernandez on risk, instinct, and the art of the long game. The cover showed a man in a charcoal suit, seated in a chair made of glass and steel, one ankle crossed over his knee, looking directly into the camera with an expression she recognized immediately. Not quite a smile. Something quieter. Something more curious. The amber eyes were unmistakable. Sofia stood very still on the corner of 54th and Lexington while the city moved around her at full speed, and she felt the specific descending weight of understanding arriving too late. She picked up the magazine. She read the name again. She looked at the photograph long enough to be certain. The man who had driven her across Midtown that morning. The man who had said you seemed like you were having a morning with the calm of someone who had nowhere more important to be, was worth more than she would earn in 40 lifetimes. She set the magazine back without buying it. Then she picked it up again and bought it. The cafe where Sofia worked 3 mornings a week as a resident designer, trading logo concepts for a corner table, reliable Wi-Fi, and an endless supply of oat milk lattes, was called Linden & Co., and it occupied the ground floor of a narrow brownstone in the West Village that smelled permanently of cardamom and fresh plaster. She was deep inside a branding project on Wednesday morning, headphones on, second coffee cooling beside her, when the door opened and brought in a current of cold air and the faint scent of cedar. She didn't look up. She had trained herself not to look up every time the door opened, a necessary discipline in a cafe that attracted an unreasonable number of interesting people. Then the chair across from her moved. She pulled out one earbud. Ryan Fernandez stood beside the table, one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair, looking at her with the same expression from the car and the magazine cover, measured, attentive, and carrying a warmth that seemed to cost him something to show. He was wearing a different blazer today, darker, fit with the quiet precision of something made specifically for his shoulders, no tie. The same watch. "You found me," Sofia said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I asked around," he said simply. "May I sit?" She gestured at the chair with her pen. "You're going to anyway. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. He sat. The barista appeared within seconds, faintly starstruck, professionally concealing it. And Ryan ordered a black coffee without looking at the menu, without performing the decision, the way people order things they've always known they want. "You should have told me," Sofia said, once they were alone again. In the car. "You should have said something." "You're right," he said. No deflection, no justification, just the acknowledgement, clean and direct, delivered with eye contact that didn't waver. She hadn't expected that. It reorganized something in her chest that she immediately tried to reorganize back. "I looked ridiculous," she said. "You looked real," he said. "That's rarer than you think." The coffee arrived. He wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't drink it immediately, just held it, like he had decided that this conversation was worth more than the temperature of the coffee. "I'm not here because I feel guilty," he said. "I want to be clear about that." "Then why are you here?" He looked at her across the small table, the distance between them no more than 2 feet, close enough that she could see the slight irregularity of his jaw, where a scar curved faint and silver beneath the stubble, close enough that the cedar scent of him reached her even through the cardamom air of the cafe. "Because in 20 minutes in a car," he said quietly, "you were the most honest person I've spoken to in 3 years. Sofia looked down at her laptop screen, at the half-finished logo, at the coffee ring on her notepad, at anything that wasn't his eyes. "That's a low bar," she said. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe you're just that rare." The cafe hummed gently around them. Someone laughed at the counter. Rain had begun to tap against the front window, soft and insistent, the way it does in New York when it has decided to stay a while. Sofia put her earbud down on the table. She didn't put it back in. It started with the coffee. Ryan hadn't touched his until it was nearly cold, and when Sofia pointed that out, not kindly, just observationally, the way she said most things, he picked up the mug and drank half of it in one slow, unbothered sip, watching her over the rim with those amber eyes that had developed an irritating habit of making her forget what she was about to say. "You do that on purpose," she said. "Do what?" "Stay calm when you're not supposed to." He set the mug down. "What am I supposed to be?" "I don't know. Nervous, apologetic, something that makes sense. I told you I wasn't here to apologize. You said you weren't here because you feel guilty. That's different." He looked at her for a moment with something that might have been surprise, quickly replaced by something that looked very much like appreciation. "You listen carefully," he said. "I'm a designer," she said. "I pay attention to what people mean, not just what they say." The rain had thickened against the window. Neither of them mentioned leaving. It was Ryan who suggested the river. He said it without preamble, the way he seemed to do most things. No performance, no build-up, just the idea placed between them like something obvious. "The Hudson's 4 blocks from here," he said. "I think better when I'm moving." Sofia looked at the rain, then at him. "It's raining. Lightly. It's October. You have a jacket." She looked at her half-finished project on the laptop screen, at the logo that wasn't quite right yet, the kerning slightly off in a way that had been bothering her for an hour. Then she closed the laptop. "If I get sick," she said, pulling on her jacket, "I'm sending you the medical bill." "I'll have someone handle it," he said, and she couldn't tell if he was joking. She suspected he wasn't entirely. The path along the Hudson was nearly empty in the mid-morning rain, just a few runners in bright technical gear, and one elderly man walking a corgi with regal indifference to the weather. Sofia and Ryan walked slowly, unhurried, with the kind of pace that belongs to people who have quietly agreed that the destination is not the point. The river was steel-grey and wide, moving with a heavy, ancient patience that made the city behind them feel suddenly temporary. "You mentioned your father," Ryan said. "In the car, something about a loan he co-signed." Sofia felt the familiar tightening, that small internal brace she'd learned to apply, whenever that subject surfaced. "I didn't think you were listening that carefully." "I was listening to everything," he said. It wasn't boastful, it was simply true, and something about the simplicity of it made it land harder than it should have. She pulled her jacket tighter. "He passed away 4 years ago. He co-signed a business loan I took out when I was 26, a design studio that didn't survive its second year. When he died, the debt transferred to his estate and complicated everything for my mum. She paused. So yes, I think about money in a way that probably sounds exhausting to someone like you. Ryan was quiet for a moment. They passed a bench slick with rain, a lamppost wrapped in a spiral of dead ivy. My father didn't die, he said, but I lost him anyway. He left when I was 9, moved to London, built a new family, sent birthday cards for 3 years and then stopped. He said it without self-pity, with the flat, practiced tone of someone who had long ago decided that fact didn't get to have power over him. My mother built the business. I inherited the architecture and added 20 floors, but there's a kind of attention you spend your whole life trying to earn from someone who isn't looking. Sofia stopped walking. He stopped too, half a step later, and turned to look at her. The rain fell between them in a fine silver curtain. I wasn't expecting that, she said quietly. Neither was I, he admitted. They stood there for a moment, close enough that she could see a drop of rain caught in his eyelashes, close enough that the space between them had become its own specific weather. She started walking again. He fell into step beside her, and their pace was slightly slower than before, as if both of them had silently agreed to let something settle. The iron railing along the path was cold and damp, and at some point, she couldn't have said exactly when, her fingers came to rest on it just as his did, not touching. A half-inch of cold air between their hands. Neither of them moved away. "Tell me something true," she said. She didn't know why she said it. It came from the same place as closing the laptop, some internal negotiation she hadn't consciously participated in. He looked at the river, then at her hand, nearly touching his. "I haven't done this in a long time," he said. "Done what?" He turned to look at her fully, the rain catching the light between them, his voice quieter now, as if the words were being said for the first time and he wasn't entirely sure of their shape. Talked to someone and felt less alone afterward. Sofia looked at the river. The grey water moved on without comment. Her finger shifted on the railing, just slightly, just barely, and the side of her hand grazed the side of his. Neither of them acknowledged it. Neither of them moved away. New York has a particular talent for coincidence. Not the gentle, forgivable kind that happens in smaller cities. The kind where you run into your neighbor at the grocery store and think nothing of it. New York's coincidences are architectural. They are constructed from impossible density and the sheer arithmetic of 8 million lives pressing against each other in an island 23 miles long. When the city decides to put two people in the same place, it does so with the quiet authority of something that has been doing this for centuries and has never once apologized for it. Sofia would later be unable to explain, even to herself, exactly when she stopped being surprised. It started the following Friday at the Meridian Gallery in Chelsea. Sofia was there on assignment. A small editorial piece for a design blog she contributed to, covering an emerging photographer whose work explored light and architecture in ways that made you feel the buildings were breathing. She had her camera, her notebook, and the focused professional expression she wore like a second jacket when she needed to remember she was working. She was standing in front of a large format photograph, a glass tower at dusk, its surface catching the last of the sun in a way that made it look molten, alive, when she became aware of someone standing beside her. Not close enough to intrude, close enough to be felt. She turned. Ryan was looking at the photograph, not at her, his hands in the pockets of a charcoal coat that fit him the way expensive things fit people who don't need to think about fit. His profile in the gallery light was clean and still, and he had the expression of someone genuinely moved by what he was looking at, unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. "You follow emerging photographers?" she asked. He turned. The unguarded expression didn't entirely disappear. It shifted, warmed. "I follow good work," he said. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I didn't know you'd be here either." "And yet," he said. "And yet," she agreed. They stood together in front of the molten tower for another moment, and the gallery hummed softly around them. Low voices, the clink of wine glasses, the particular hush that art imposes on people who are paying attention. "The light in this one," Sofia said, nodding at the photograph. "He shot it from below, which is why it feels like you're inside it instead of outside it. Most architectural photography keeps you at a distance. This pulls you in." Ryan looked at it again with fresh attention. "You see differently than other people," he said. "It's just training." "It's not just training." She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either. 4 days later, on a Tuesday evening, Sofia was at the Whitmore Hotel on Park Avenue. The same editorial client had booked her to photograph a product launch on the 32nd floor. She was packing up her equipment at the end of the night, loading lenses back into their cases with the methodical care of someone who has learned that expensive things require patience. When the elevator opened and Ryan stepped out with 2 other men in suits, mid-conversation, his phone in one hand and his attention fully allocated elsewhere. He saw her in the same moment she saw him. The conversation with his colleagues continued for exactly 4 more seconds before he said something brief and quiet that concluded it, and then he was walking toward her with the unhurried certainty of someone who has made a decision and is simply executing it. 32nd floor, she said when he reached her. 34th, he said. Investor dinner. Of course. You say that like it means something. It means you eat better than I do. The corner of his mouth moved. He looked at the equipment case in her hands. Can I help with that? I have it. I know you have it. He reached for the case anyway, not assertively, just present, his hand near hers on the handle, waiting. She looked at his hand, then at him. Then she let go of the handle. They rode the elevator down together in a silence that had long since stopped being uncomfortable and had become something else, something with weight and texture, something that asked to be acknowledged without quite forcing the issue. The rain that found them under the marquees on Harrison Street in Tribeca 3 nights later was the kind that arrives without warning, sudden, generous, and completely indifferent to plans. Sofia had been walking back from a late client call, her portfolio bag over her shoulder, when the sky made its decision. She ducked under the nearest overhang and pulled out her phone and found, without any meaningful surprise, that Ryan was already there. He was leaning against the wall with his coat collar turned up, looking at the rain with the expression of a man who has decided to find it interesting rather than inconvenient. He glanced at her sideways. We have to stop meeting like this. We're not meeting, she said, pressing herself against the wall beside him, close because the marquise was narrow and the rain was serious. We just happen to be in the same place. For the 3rd time in a week. New York is a small city. New York is the opposite of a small city, she laughed. It came out before she could arrange her face into something more neutral, quick and unfiltered, the laugh she used when she wasn't performing anything for anyone. She heard it happen and felt the slight warmth of exposure that comes with being genuinely caught off guard. Ryan didn't say anything. But when she turned to look at him, the expression on his face was the same one she'd seen in front of the glass tower at the gallery. Open, careful, like someone watching something they don't want to disturb. The rain fell hard and silver around the marquise. Their shoulders were touching. Neither of them suggested moving. The invitation arrived as a text message on a Thursday morning. Sofia was at her desk in her apartment, a 1-bedroom in the West Village that she had spent 2 years making feel intentional, with plants that actually survived, shelves built from reclaimed wood, and a drafting table positioned beneath the window that caught the best light between 10 and noon. She had coffee. She had a deadline. She had every reason to say no. There's a property in Southampton I've been meaning to have redesigned. Guest house renovation, interior concept and spatial flow. I think you'd see things I'm not seeing. Weekend after next, if you're free. No pressure either way. She read it twice, then a 3rd time. Then she set her phone face down on the desk and stared at the half-finished brand identity on her screen for 4 minutes without actually seeing it. The problem, and she was clear-eyed enough to identify it as a problem, was that she wanted to go. Not for the project, though the project was real and the kind of work she didn't usually get access to. She wanted to go because the conversations by the Hudson and the silences in the elevator and the shoulder-to-shoulder rain in Tribeca had collectively done something to her interior architecture that she hadn't authorized and couldn't easily undo. She picked up the phone. Typed, "Send me the project brief and I'll take a look." His response came in under a minute. "There is no brief yet. That's why I need you." She stared at that for a long moment. Then she typed, "Fine, but I'm expensing the train." 3 dots appeared. Then, "I'll send a car." She almost argued. She didn't. Southampton in October was a different country from the city. The car Ryan sent was quiet and dark and warm, and Sofia watched New York dissolve into highway and then into the particular flat, wind-scrubbed landscape of the eastern end of Long Island. The sky bigger out here, the light thinner and more honest. The trees holding their last color like an argument they knew they were losing. The house was not what she expected. She had assembled a version of it in her imagination during the 2-hour drive. Something ostentatious, something that announced itself, the architectural equivalent of a firm handshake. What she found instead was a low, cedar-shingled structure set back from the dunes, its lines horizontal and calm, its relationship to the landscape one of conversation rather than imposition. It was beautiful in the specific way of things that don't try to be. Ryan was waiting on the front step with 2 coffees and no jacket, which seemed to be a pattern. "You're going to freeze," she said, getting out of the car. "I run warm," he said, and handed her one of the coffees. Their fingers overlapped on the cup for half a second. She took it and looked at the house. "It's not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "More glass, more square footage, more statement." "I have enough statements in the city," he said. He looked at the house with an expression that was quieter than his usual composure, something closer to affection, the kind directed at things that have known you in your less assembled moments. "Out here, I just want it to be honest." She looked at him sideways. He was already looking at the house, and the October light hit the line of his jaw and the slight silver at his temple in a way that she noted and immediately filed under not relevant. "Show me the guest house," she said. They worked through the afternoon with the focused, easy rhythm of 2 people who have discovered they think in compatible ways. Sofia moved through the small guest cottage with her notebook and her eye, measuring sight lines, testing light at different hours, sketching flow diagrams on graph paper, while Ryan answered her questions directly and without the defensive hovering she sometimes encountered with clients who didn't actually trust the process. He trusted the process. He trusted her. She found this more disarming than she had prepared for. They cooked dinner together in the main kitchen, something simple, pasta and a salad, the kind of meal that happens when 2 people are hungry and comfortable and not trying to impress each other. Ryan chopped vegetables with the competent, unsentimental efficiency of someone who has fed himself for a long time. Sofia found a playlist on her phone that he didn't object to, which she considered meaningful data. "You cook like you drive," she said. He glanced at her. "Meaning?" "Like you know exactly what you're doing and you're not going to explain it." He considered this. "Is that bad?" "It's just accurate." After dinner, they walked on the beach. The sand was cold and soft, and they had both removed their shoes without discussing it, carrying them in their outside hands while the Atlantic pushed and pulled at the edge of the world with vast, rhythmic indifference. The sky out here was extraordinary, deep and starless near the horizon, where cloud cover moved in from the east, but open and dense with light directly above. The kind of sky that makes city people stop talking. They stopped talking. The silence between them on that beach was not empty. It was the fullest silence Sofia had experienced in years, packed with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't, with the awareness of his arm near hers, with the sound of the ocean doing what oceans do when people stand beside them and feel small in useful ways. They were standing still when he turned to face her. She turned too, and they were closer than the walk had suggested, the beach having done what beaches do, quietly erasing distances. He raised both hands slowly and held her face, his palms warm against her cold cheeks, his thumbs near the corners of her eyes, his expression stripped of everything except what was true. He stayed like that for 3 full seconds. Then he lowered his hands, stepped back, looked at the ocean. "Ryan," she said. "I know," he said quietly. "Then why Because the last time I let myself want something this much, he said, still looking at the water, his voice low and careful, I was not careful with it, and I don't know how to be careless with you. The waves came in. The waves went out. Sofia stood in the cold October sand and felt the precise, terrible clarity of a moment that has changed something permanent, and understood, with equal clarity, that he had just told her the truest thing he knew. Patricia Fernandez did not make mistakes. This was not arrogance, or rather it was not only arrogance, it was the carefully maintained operating principle of a woman who had built a financial empire from the wreckage of an absent husband and a Manhattan real estate market that had tried on 3 separate occasions to destroy her. She had outlasted the market each time. She had outlasted the husband long before that. She had learned in the process that sentiment was the most expensive luxury a woman in her position could afford, and she had stopped affording it somewhere around her 42nd birthday. She was 61 now, and she sat behind a desk of pale marble in her Upper East Side apartment, 1,200 square feet of curated restraint, all ivory and bone, and the occasional piece of art, chosen for investment value rather than beauty. And she looked at the file her assistant had prepared with the focused attention of someone conducting due diligence on a position she intended to close. Sofia Reyes, 29, freelance designer, West Village. Annual income irregular, no significant assets, father deceased, mother in Queens, student debt partially resolved, 1 failed business venture, age 26, duration 14 months. Patricia closed the file. She already knew what she needed to know. The invitation came to Sofia as a handwritten note, delivered to the cafe by a private courier on a Tuesday morning. The stationery was heavy and cream-colored, with a Park Avenue return address embossed in the upper left corner, in a font that communicated wealth without appearing to try. The handwriting was precise and vertical, each letter exactly where it intended to be. Ms. Reyes, I would appreciate a brief meeting at your earliest convenience. I believe we have a matter of mutual interest to discuss. Patricia Fernandez Sofia read it 3 times. She thought about calling Ryan. She decided, for reasons she didn't fully examine, to go alone. The elevator that opened into Patricia's apartment was private and paneled in pale oak, and when the doors parted, Sofia stepped into a space that felt less like a home than a statement, a controlled environment where every object had been placed to communicate something specific about the woman who lived there. The orchids on the console table were white and solitary. The art on the walls was abstract and cold. The light came from sources she couldn't identify, diffused and directionless, the kind of light designed to show nothing it didn't choose to show. Patricia was already standing when Sofia entered. She was tall, impeccably assembled in a steel-grey blazer and wide-leg trousers. Her dark hair, still striking, barely touched with silver, pulled back with the severity of someone who considered elegance a discipline. She looked at Sofia with eyes that were Ryan's in shape, but entirely different in temperature. "Thank you for coming," she said, with the warmth of a closing statement. "Thank you for the invitation," Sofia said, because she had been raised with manners, even when they cost her. Patricia gestured toward the seating area, 2 low chairs facing each other across a coffee table of veined marble, a tray with tea that neither of them would touch. And there, placed with specific, deliberate intention at the center of the table, face up and already filled out, a check. Sofia looked at it without moving toward it. The number had enough zeros that her vision sharpened involuntarily. "I'll be direct," Patricia said, settling into her chair with the ease of someone on entirely familiar ground. "My son is at a particular moment in his professional life. Fernandez Capital is finalizing a merger that has taken 14 months to negotiate. The scrutiny on Ryan personally and on his associations is significant. A relationship with someone at your..." She paused, choosing the word with surgical care. "Stage of establishment would create complications that neither of you needs." Sofia looked at the check, then at Patricia. "I'm not asking you to disappear," Patricia continued. "I'm asking you to make a sensible decision. The amount on that check would resolve your outstanding debts, fund a proper studio, and give you the kind of foundation your talent clearly deserves." She said talent as if she meant it, which was the most unsettling part. "This is not a punishment, Ms. Reyes. It's a practical solution to a situation that, if left unmanaged, becomes difficult for everyone." The apartment was very quiet. Somewhere far below, the city moved and breathed and conducted its indifferent business. Up here in this pale and calculated room, the silence was different, pressurized, deliberate, waiting. Sofia looked at the check one final time. She thought about her mother in Queens and the debt that had followed her father's death like a shadow. She thought about the studio she had sketched in the margins of notebooks for 3 years. She thought about the guest cottage in Southampton and the sound of the ocean and the warmth of 2 hands holding her face in the October cold. She reached forward. She picked up the check. She looked at Patricia Fernandez, at those cool, certain eyes, at the composed mouth, at the absolute conviction of a woman who had never once expected to lose this particular kind of negotiation. And she tore the check in half. The sound it made was small and clean and final. She placed both halves on the marble table, aligned neatly, as if presentation still mattered. "I appreciate your directness," Sofia said, standing. "I'll see myself out." She crossed the ivory room without hurrying. The elevator doors opened as if they had been expecting her. She stepped in, pressed the lobby button, and stood very still while the floor descended, her hands steady at her sides, her heart loud and fast and entirely her own. Patricia Fernandez sat alone in her pale apartment and looked at the 2 pieces of the check on her marble table. She had not expected that. She began, immediately, to think about what came next. Patricia Fernandez was not a woman who accepted a single outcome. She sat in her pale apartment for exactly 11 minutes after the elevator doors closed behind Sofia Reyes. 11 minutes of absolute stillness, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the 2 pieces of the check aligned neatly on the marble table. Then she reached forward, picked them up and carried them to her desk, with the calm of someone who has decided that a failed negotiation is simply a negotiation that requires a different approach. She opened her top drawer. She placed the pieces inside. She closed the drawer. Then she picked up her phone and began to make calls. Patricia understood, with the precision of someone who had spent 4 decades operating in rooms where perception was currency, that the most effective lies are not invented from nothing. They are built from existing materials, real feelings, real fears, real silences, and shaped into something that the listener is already halfway prepared to believe. Ryan's weakness, the one she had identified when he was 9 years old, and standing at the window watching a car disappear down the driveway, was the belief that people he loved would eventually choose something else over him. It was old and deep, and he had built considerable architecture over it, the self-sufficiency, the controlled pace, the careful way he held things he wanted. But it was still there. It was always still there. She called him on Wednesday evening. Her voice was measured and soft, calibrated to the specific frequency of maternal concern. "I had a visitor last week," she said. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure." A pause, precisely timed. "Sofia came to see me, Ryan. I don't know how she found me. She asked about the family, about Fernandez Capital, about the merger timeline." Another pause. "And then she asked about the trust structure." Ryan was quiet on the other end. She could feel him processing, the way he always had, methodical, thorough, trying to find the angle that made the information make sense. "She left with something," Patricia said. "I want to be careful about how I say this because I know what she means to you. But the check I keep in the office for discretionary expenses, it was gone after she left. A significant amount, Ryan. I checked the camera in the hallway." The silence on his end lasted 4 seconds. She counted. "I'm sure there's an explanation," he said. His voice was flat in the specific way it went flat when he was working very hard to stay level. "I'm sure there is too," Patricia said gently. "I just thought you should know." She ended the call. She sat back. She waited. Patricia's call to Sofia came the following morning from a number Sofia didn't recognize. "I wanted to reach out personally," Patricia said, and her voice had transformed entirely. Warmer now, almost apologetic. carrying the careful texture of a woman delivering unwelcome news with reluctant honesty. "Ryan asked me to contact you. He felt it would be easier coming from me rather than directly." A breath. He's decided to step back. The merger is at a critical stage, and his advisors have been very clear about the optics of a personal situation that draws attention. He thinks it's best if the two of you don't see each other for the foreseeable future. Sofia stood in her kitchen in the grey morning light, her coffee going cold in her hand. "He said that," she said. Her voice was very even. "He's not good at these conversations," Patricia said, with the rehearsed warmth of someone performing regret. "He asked me to tell you that he's grateful for the time you spent together and that he hopes you understand." The line was quiet for a moment. "I understand perfectly," Sofia said. She ended the call. She set her phone on the counter. She stood in her kitchen for a long time, looking at nothing, while the city moved outside her window with its usual vast indifference. She did not cry. The feeling that moved through her was colder than grief. It was the specific, nauseating recognition of having been exactly as foolish as she had warned herself not to be. Of having let the guard down that she had spent years building precisely for this kind of thing. She opened her portfolio. She pulled up the Southampton files. She moved them to a folder labeled Archived and closed the program. Ryan spent 3 days trying to construct an explanation that made Sofia's behavior make sense and failed every time. She had seemed so, and this was the word that kept returning, the one he couldn't architect around: real. The coffee she let go cold because she was talking. The laugh she didn't manage to suppress. The way she had held his gaze on the beach, not with challenge, but with the quiet, unflinching honesty of someone who had decided he was worth seeing clearly. People who wanted something from him didn't look at him like that. He had learned at considerable cost to tell the difference. And yet, he called her number on the 4th day. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording was professional and brief, and he stood in his office with its glass walls and its city view and listened to it and said nothing and ended the call. He told himself it was pride. He was almost certain it was something else entirely. The silence between them settled like sediment, heavy, layered, obscuring the floor of something that had been, briefly, very clear. Neither of them knew the other was standing on the same side of the same wall, put there by the same pair of hands. Neither of them knew the wall was made of paper. 3 months is long enough to rebuild a routine. Sofia had done it before, after her father died, after the studio failed, after the particular kind of heartbreak that arrives not with drama, but with the slow, grinding realization that something you were counting on is simply no longer there. She knew the architecture of recovery. You fill the hours with work. You let your friends talk, and you listen well enough that they don't worry. You find small things to be precise about: the alignment of objects on your desk, the temperature of your coffee, the exact route you take each morning, because precision in small things creates the illusion of control over large ones. She took on more clients. She redesigned her portfolio website. She started running again, early mornings along the Hudson, which required a particular quality of not thinking that she had come to rely on. She did not think about Southampton. She did not think about amber eyes or cedar and clean air, or the weight of 2 hands holding her face in the October cold. She had filed those things in the same internal folder as the Southampton project files, archived, and she was, by most observable measures, fine. She was so convincingly fine that she almost believed it herself. Almost. Ryan sold the apartment in March. Not the main residence, the older one, a 2-bedroom on the Upper West Side that he'd kept for years out of a vague, unexamined sentimentality. It was where he'd lived when Fernandez Capital was still an idea rather than an institution, where he'd eaten takeout on the floor because he hadn't yet owned a table, where the walls still had the faint ghosts of picture hooks from a version of himself he rarely thought about anymore. The new buyers needed possession by the 1st of April, which meant he needed to go through what remained. He went on a Saturday morning in late March, when the light came in flat and pale through the west-facing windows, and the empty rooms had the specific acoustic quality of spaces that have been lived in and then abandoned, sounds landing differently. the silence itself changed by the absence of furniture and presents and accumulated life. Most of it was already packed. A moving company had handled the main items weeks earlier. What remained was the residue, the things in the backs of closets and the bottoms of drawers that accumulate without intention, the objects that survive every edit because they are never quite important enough to keep deliberately and never quite dispensable enough to throw away. He worked methodically, room by room, breaking down boxes and adding them to the stack by the door. The second bedroom first, the hall closet, the bathroom cabinet with its expired prescriptions and spare buttons, and a watch he'd forgotten he owned. The desk in the second bedroom was last. The top drawer held pens and paper clips, and a charging cable for a phone model he no longer owned. The second drawer held files neatly labeled, nothing relevant. The third drawer, the deep one at the bottom, the one that in every desk becomes a repository for things that don't have an assigned category, held a folder of old lease documents, a broken pair of sunglasses, a photograph. He paused at briefly, and then set aside and at the very back, pressed flat against the wood as if it had been placed there with the intention of staying forgotten, a manila envelope. He didn't recognize it immediately. He turned it over. Unsealed. His name written on the front in handwriting he didn't know. He opened it. Inside was a check, in two pieces, carefully aligned and held together with a strip of transparent tape. The torn edges matched with a precision that suggested time and intention. His mother's account. His mother's signature. A number with enough zeros that his jaw tightened involuntarily. And below the check, a single sheet of paper. No letterhead. No date. Just a few lines in the same handwriting as the envelope. In case anyone ever needs to know what actually happened, I was here. I said no. This is proof. S.R. Ryan sat down on the floor of the empty room. He sat there for a long time, the envelope in his hands, the two pieces of the check visible through the transparent tape, the city sounds filtering up from the street below with their ordinary persistence, a truck reversing, a dog barking, a child saying something emphatic that the distance rendered wordless. He thought about his mother's voice on the phone 3 months ago. The measured softness of it, the calibrated pauses, the way she had delivered the information with just enough reluctance to make it feel like honesty. He thought about Sofia's phone ringing 4 times and going to voicemail. He thought about the wall that had been between them for 3 months and understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once, and rearranged everything, exactly what it was made of, and exactly whose hands had built it. He stood up. He put the envelope in the interior pocket of his jacket, close to his chest where he could feel the slight weight of it with every breath. He called his mother from the empty hallway, standing among the boxes. She answered on the second ring with the easy confidence of someone who has no reason to expect the call is anything other than ordinary. "Ryan, the check," he said. "The one you told me Sofia took. I need you to explain it to me. Take your time. I want to understand exactly what you're going to say." A pause. The first unscripted pause he had heard from her in 30 years. "Ryan, I was trying to protect. I found the envelope," he said. "I found what she kept." The silence that followed was different from all the other silences in this story. It was the silence of a woman who has built a wall and watched it come apart in her hands, and who has, perhaps for the first time, nothing left to build with. Ryan did not fill the silence for her. He stood in the empty hallway of the apartment he was leaving behind and waited, the envelope pressed against his chest, his heart doing something it hadn't done in 3 months, moving fast and clean and in the direction of something worth reaching for. He drove himself. No driver, no car service, no one in the passenger seat to make the silence feel managed. Just Ryan and the city and the particular quality of a Sunday afternoon in early April, when New York is remembering how to be warm and the light has that new, tentative quality of a season that isn't quite sure it's arrived yet. He had Patricia's confession still settling in him, like something he'd swallowed that hadn't finished moving. She had not cried. He hadn't expected her to. She had explained herself with the same precision she brought to everything, the merger, the scrutiny, the practical assessment of risk. And he had listened to all of it without interrupting, because he had learned from her, among other things, that clarity requires patience. When she finished, he had said, "You built something real. I know that. and I know why you protect it. A pause. But you don't get to decide who I am outside of it. He had ended the call before she could respond. He was still not certain whether that was strength or avoidance. He decided it didn't matter yet. What mattered was the envelope in his jacket. What mattered was the West Village. What mattered was getting there before the part of him that was still learning how to want things without bracing for their loss could talk him into something more measured and less true. Sofia's building had an intercom panel with small weathered buttons and a camera with a cracked housing that she had mentioned once. He remembered this now, retrieving it from somewhere in the stored archive of things he had listened to carefully and not known he was keeping. He found her name. He pressed the button. Silence. Then static. Then her voice, careful and flat in the specific way of someone who has looked at the camera and already decided to be defended. Ryan. Not a question. A preparation. Sofia. He looked directly at the camera. I have something to show you. I'm not going to explain it through an intercom. Please. A long pause. The kind that has texture. He could feel her on the other side of it, weighing things, running the calculation he had put her through without meaning to, without knowing he was doing it. The door buzzed open. She was waiting in the doorway of her apartment when he reached the third floor, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed, not aggressively, but as a kind of structural support, the way people hold themselves when they are not yet sure they are steady. She was wearing a grey sweater and jeans, and her hair was down, and she looked like someone who had been working and had not expected this and had decided not to pretend otherwise. You look well, he said, because it was true and because he needed a moment before the harder things. You don't have to do that, she said. I know. He reached into his jacket. He took out the envelope. He held it toward her with both hands, the way you offer something you understand the weight of. She looked at it. She looked at him. She took it. She opened it, standing in the doorway, and he watched her face as she processed what was inside, the recognition arriving in stages, moving through her expression like weather, the check she had torn and kept, the words she had written below it, and then the understanding of why he was holding it, why he had come, what it meant that it existed, and that he had found it. She looked up. Her eyes were bright in a way she wasn't trying to manage. Come in, she said quietly. The apartment was exactly as he had assembled it in his mind from the things she'd described. The drafting table under the window, the reclaimed wood shelves, the plants that had survived. It smelled like coffee and turpentine and something green, and it felt like a place that had been made with intention and care, and not enough money and a great deal of self. He stood in the middle of it and told her everything. Not the curated version, not the version that protected his dignity, or positioned him well, or arrived with the smooth finish of something rehearsed. He told her about his mother's call and what it had done to the part of him that was already waiting to be proven right about people leaving. He told her about the 4 days he'd spent constructing explanations, and the voicemail he'd called and said nothing into, and the silence that had settled like sediment over 3 months. He told her about the apartment, the empty drawer, the envelope pressed against wood like something that had decided to wait. He told her about sitting on the floor of an empty room, holding proof of something he should have asked about instead of assumed. When he finished, Sofia was sitting on the arm of the sofa, not quite sitting, perched, as if she hadn't fully decided to stay, and she was looking at him with an expression he had not seen from her before. Not the irony or the precision or the careful, defended warmth he had come to know as her vocabulary, something raw, something that had been under all of those things for 3 months, pressurized and waiting. I thought you sent her, she said. Her voice was very quiet. I thought it was you. I know. I sat in my kitchen and I told myself I had been exactly as stupid as I knew better than to be. She stopped, looked at the envelope still in her hands. I kept the check because I needed to know that it had happened, that I had said no, that regardless of anything else, that part was real. It was real, he said. All of it was real. She looked at him then, fully, without the managed distance, without the careful architecture of self-protection she wore so well. And something in her face shifted, the way a room shifts when someone opens a window and real air comes in, sudden and necessary and irreversible. She didn't say anything. She stood up from the arm of the sofa and crossed the small space between them, and when she reached him, she put her head against his chest and her hands at his sides, and he wrapped both arms around her with the careful, deliberate force of someone who has been holding something at a distance for a very long time and has finally, irrevocably, let it go. It was not a romantic embrace in the performed sense. There was nothing composed or choreographed about it. It was the embrace of two people who had been handed the same lie from the same pair of hands and had spent 3 months alone on the same side of a wall neither of them built, and who were now, without ceremony or announcement, simply done being alone in it. Sofia breathed. Ryan held on. The April light came through the drafting table window and fell across the floor in long, pale rectangles. Outside, the city moved. Inside, something that had been suspended for 3 months quietly finally landed. 3 weeks is not a long time. In the scale of a city like New York, 3 weeks is nothing. A blink, a season change, a subway delay. Buildings go up and come down in 3 weeks. Entire relationships begin and end in 3 weeks. The city doesn't notice. The city has never noticed. But for Ryan and Sofia, 3 weeks had the quality of something much longer and much more deliberate. The kind of time that accumulates not in days, but in choices, in the small daily decisions to show up without armor, to say the true thing instead of the safe one, to let someone see the unassembled version and trust that they will stay anyway. They had not rushed. That was the thing Sofia returned to privately when she thought about how different this felt from the other time she had let someone in. There had been no accelerated intimacy, no performed vulnerability, no relationship that moved fast because speed felt like certainty. They had moved at the pace of people who had already learned what it cost to assume. Ryan had called her 3 days after the Sunday in her apartment, not to navigate anything, not to define or establish or negotiate, just to say that he had walked past Linden & Co. on his way to a meeting and thought of her and had decided for once to say so. She had been in the middle of a client call. She had put it on hold for 4 minutes. That was, she thought later, probably when she knew. Central Park on an April afternoon is one of the few places in Manhattan where the city's relentlessness becomes optional. The trees along the path were doing what April trees do, that tentative, almost embarrassed emergence of green, as if they aren't quite sure the cold is finished and are hedging their bets with small, careful leaves. The light came through them in shifting, dappled patterns that moved across the path like something breathing. Around Ryan and Sofia, the park conducted its usual weekend democracy. Runners and strollers and cyclists and people lying in the new grass with the extravagant relief of those who have survived another New York winter. They walked slowly. They had established this as a pattern over 3 weeks, the slow walk, the unhurried pace, the refusal to treat time together as something to be optimized. Ryan had meetings that could have started earlier. Sofia had a deadline that could have pulled her back to her desk. Neither of them mentioned these things. She was telling him about a client, a restaurant group that wanted a brand identity that felt both elevated and approachable, which she explained was the design equivalent of being asked to make water that was also dry. He was listening with the complete, unhurried attention she had come to recognize as one of his defining qualities. The way he made you feel that what you were saying was the only thing currently happening in the world. So I told them, she continued, that elevated and approachable aren't opposites. They're just a conversation about proportion. You don't make something approachable by making it less refined. You make it approachable by making it honest. Ryan looked at her sideways. You say that a lot. Say what? Honest. It's your highest compliment. She considered this. Is that wrong? No, he said. It's one of my favorite things about you. She looked ahead at the path. The light moved through the trees. A child ran past them with the specific, full commitment speed of someone who has not yet learned to conserve energy for later. You can't just say things like that, she said. I used to agree with you, he said. I'm trying something different. They had stopped near the reservoir without planning to. The water flat and silver in the afternoon light, the skyline visible beyond the trees in the middle distance, all glass and verticality and the particular arrogance of buildings that believe they will last forever. Sofia was leaning on the iron fence, looking at the water, her jacket open to the warmth that had finally decided to commit. Ryan stood beside her, close. The arm-to-arm closeness that had stopped requiring justification somewhere in the second week. He was quiet for a moment. She had learned his silences well enough by now to read their quality. This one was not the silence of someone with nothing to say. It was the silence of someone choosing how to say something that matters. She waited. "I keep thinking about the car," he said finally. "The wrong car." "The wrong car," he agreed. "You got in and you just talked, like I was nobody, like there was no performance required." He paused. "Do you know how rare that is? To be talked to like a person instead of a position?" "You could have told me who you were," she said, "in the first 30 seconds. "I know." "Why didn't you?" He was quiet again. The reservoir moved in its slow, circular way, the light breaking across it in small, shifting pieces. "Because I wanted 30 more seconds of being nobody," he said. "And then you said something funny and I wanted 30 more after that. And then we were at 54th and Lex and it was over." He looked at her. "Except it wasn't." Sofia turned to face him. The afternoon light was doing something specific to his face, softening the angles, catching the amber in his eyes, making him look less like the man on the magazine cover and more like the man in the car and on the beach and in the empty room, with the envelope pressed to his chest. "Ryan," she said. "Sofia. You're going to say something, aren't you?" "I was working up to it." "Work faster." He almost smiled. Then he stopped, almost smiling, and looked at her with the full, unmanaged directness that she had learned was the truest version of him, stripped of the composure and the careful architecture and the practiced self-sufficiency. Just a man standing beside a woman in a park in April, choosing to be exactly that and nothing more defended. "The next time someone gets into the wrong car," he said, "I hope it's mine." She looked at him. The city breathed around them. The trees made their small, tentative sounds. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once and then was satisfied. She felt it then, the full, unguarded weight of something she had not let herself name until this moment, standing in the light with the reservoir at her back, and 3 weeks of carefully chosen honesty between them, and nothing left to protect herself from. It moved through her not like a beginning, but like a recognition. The specific feeling of understanding that something has been true for longer than you acknowledged it. She laughed. Not the controlled, self-monitoring laugh she sometimes used as punctuation, the real one, unfiltered and brief and entirely her own, the one that had escaped in the cafe and under the Tribeca marquise, and that she had never quite managed to retrieve before it gave her away. When she stopped laughing, she leaned forward and kissed him before he finished smiling. His hand came up to the back of her hair, gentle and certain, and the city went on around them in its enormous, indifferent way, the runners and the cyclists and the families and the buildings and the April light moving through new leaves, and somewhere in the vast machinery of it all, the sequence of wrong turns and right silences and one torn check pressed between 2 pieces of tape quietly arrived at the place it had always been headed. Fate, which Sofia had spent years refusing to believe in, observed the whole thing from a comfortable distance. It looked, by all accounts, entirely unsurprised. She got into the wrong car, and that single chaotic, ordinary mistake led her exactly where she was always meant to be. Because sometimes the wrong turn is the most honest direction life offers. Sometimes the detour is the destination. If this story moved something in you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. Every single one means more than you know. And if you want to go deeper, no ads, no interruptions, new stories every single day, romances more intense and more immersive than anything I can share here. The link is in the first pinned comment. Trust me. Inside, it's a whole different level.